The courtroom just delivered a verdict that's going to shake the Cleveland Browns to their core. Deshaun Watson, the $250 quarterback who's been at the center of one of the most controversial contracts in NFL history, just received a final court decision that changes everything. Not about the civil lawsuits from years ago. This is something different, something nobody saw coming, a legal ruling that directly impacts his guaranteed contract, his ability to play in 2026, and the Browns' salary cap situation for the next 3 years. And according to sources who were inside that courtroom when the judge made the ruling, what just happened could give the Cleveland Browns an escape hatch from the worst contract in sports history. Or it could lock them into financial hell for another half-decade. The details are insane, the implications are massive, and the Browns front office is in emergency meetings right now, trying to figure out what this means for their entire franchise. February 7th, 2026, a courtroom in Houston, Texas. Deshaun Watson is not present, but his legal team is. The Cleveland Browns have representatives there as well, and the judge presiding over this case is about to deliver a ruling that will send shockwaves through the NFL. This case isn't about the sexual misconduct allegations that plagued Watson years ago. Those civil lawsuits were settled. This is about something entirely different, and it stems from a clause buried deep inside Watson's contract with the Cleveland Browns that almost nobody paid attention to when it was signed in March 2022. Let me take you back to understand how we got here, because this story starts with the most controversial contract in NFL history. In March 2022, the Cleveland Browns traded 3 first-round picks and additional draft capital to the Houston Texans to acquire Deshaun Watson. Then they gave him a fully guaranteed 5-year, $230 million contract. At the time, it was the largest guaranteed contract ever given to an NFL player. But Watson came with enormous baggage. He was facing 22 civil lawsuits alleging sexual misconduct during massage therapy sessions. The NFL was investigating. The media coverage was relentless. And despite all of that, the Browns went all in, betting that Watson would return to his 2020 form when he was one of the best quarterbacks in football. The contract was structured in a unique way to protect Watson during his expected suspension. His 2022 base salary was only $1 million, so when the NFL suspended him for 11 games, he barely lost any money. The real money kicked in starting in 2023, with massive guaranteed payments each year through 2026. But buried in the contract language was a clause that the Browns' legal team insisted on including. It's called a conduct detrimental clause with specific performance triggers. Essentially, it states that if Watson engages in conduct that violates the NFL's personal conduct policy after signing the contract, and if that conduct results in a suspension of 8 games or more in a single season, the Browns have the option to void the remaining guaranteed money on his contract.
At the time, everyone assumed this clause was just a legal formality, a way for the Browns to protect themselves against some hypothetical future issue. Nobody thought it would ever actually be invoked. But then, something happened in late 2025 that nobody saw coming. In November 2025, a new lawsuit was filed against Deshaun Watson. Not a civil lawsuit like the previous ones, a criminal complaint. According to court documents that were made public in December 2025, Watson was accused of violating a restraining order that had been issued as part of one of the earlier settled cases. The details are complicated and involve allegations that Watson contacted an individual who had previously settled a lawsuit with him despite being legally prohibited from doing so. Watson's legal team denied the allegations immediately, claiming it was a case of mistaken identity and that Watson had no knowledge of any restraining order. But the damage was done. The NFL launched an investigation under its personal conduct policy, and in January 2026, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell announced that Deshaun Watson was being suspended for the first 12 games of the 2026 season for violating the league's personal conduct policy. 12 games! That's more than the 8-game threshold specified in Watson's contract. The moment that suspension was announced, the Cleveland Browns legal team went into action. According to sources, General Manager Andrew Berry, owner Jimmy Haslam, and the team's attorneys held an emergency meeting. They pulled out Watson's contract and reviewed the conduct detrimental clause, and they realized they had an option. The Browns could invoke the clause and attempt to void the remaining guaranteed money on Watson's contract, which amounts to over $92 million owed from 2026 through 2028. But there was a problem. The language in the clause is somewhat ambiguous. It says the Browns have the option to void the guarantees, but it doesn't specify the exact legal process for doing so. Watson's representation argued that the clause only applies to new conduct that violates the personal conduct policy, not conduct related to the same pattern of behavior that led to his 2022 suspension. In other words, Watson's lawyers claimed that since the new allegations were still connected to the massage therapy incidents from years ago, it shouldn't trigger the clause because it's not truly new misconduct.
The Browns disagreed. They argued that a violation of a restraining order is separate and distinct from the original allegations, and therefore the clause applies. The two sides couldn't reach an agreement, so it went to court. And that's where we are right now, February 7th, 2026, waiting for a judge to decide whether the Cleveland Browns can escape from the worst contract in sports history. The courtroom is packed. NFL media members are in attendance. Legal analysts are live tweeting every detail. And when the judge finally delivers the ruling, the room erupts. The judge rules in favor of Deshaun Watson. According to the ruling, which sources have provided to multiple NFL insiders, the judge determined that the conduct detrimental clause in Watson's contract is enforceable, but the Browns did not meet the burden of proof required to void the guarantees. The judge stated that while Watson's 12-game suspension does technically meet the threshold specified in the contract, the allegations underlying the suspension are substantially related to the conduct that occurred before he signed with Cleveland. Therefore, the judge ruled, invoking the clause would constitute a breach of contract by the Browns, because Watson's representation can reasonably argue that the team knew about the pattern of behavior when they signed him and accepted that risk by offering a fully guaranteed contract. The Cleveland Browns are stuck with Deshaun Watson's contract. All $92 million of remaining guaranteed money is still owed. The reaction is immediate and catastrophic for Cleveland. Within minutes of the ruling, social media explodes. Browns fans are devastated. The hashtag worst contract ever starts trending nationally. NFL analysts are calling this the final nail in the coffin for the Browns' championship hopes. Reporters are already writing stories about how this decision hamstrings Cleveland's ability to build a competitive roster for the next 3 years. Because here's the reality of what this ruling means. The Browns are now locked in to paying Deshaun Watson over $92 million in guaranteed money through 2028, even though he's suspended for 12 games in 2026 and has shown no signs of returning to elite play when he is on the field. The salary cap implications are brutal. Watson's cap hit in 2026 is approximately $73 million. That's almost 30% of the team's entire salary cap, tied up in one player who won't even play until December. The Browns can't sign major free agents. They can't extend their own players. They're financially handcuffed. And it gets worse. If the Browns try to cut or trade Watson after 2026, the dead money hit on their salary cap would be catastrophic. They'd be paying him not to play for them, while also trying to pay another quarterback to actually start. It's a financial nightmare with no good exit strategy.
Jimmy Haslam, the Browns owner, released a statement within hours of the court ruling. It was carefully worded by lawyers, but the frustration was obvious. The statement said the Browns, quote, respect the court's decision, but are, quote, disappointed with the outcome and are, quote, exploring all available options to manage the roster and salary cap situation moving forward. The Browns are screwed, and they know it. Andrew Berry, the general manager, held a press conference later that evening. He looked exhausted. When asked directly if the Browns regret signing Deshaun Watson, Berry refused to say yes, but he also couldn't defend the decision convincingly. He talked about unforeseen circumstances and contractual complexities and moving forward as an organization. But reporters weren't having it. They pressed him on whether this ruling changes the team's quarterback plans for 2026 and beyond. Berry admitted that the Browns are evaluating all options at the quarterback position, but that Watson is still under contract and will be part of the team when he's eligible to return from suspension. That answer tells you everything. The Browns don't want Watson anymore, but they're stuck with him. Meanwhile, Deshaun Watson himself released a statement through his legal team. He expressed gratitude for the court's ruling and stated that he's committed to returning to the field in 2026 and proving his value to the Browns organization. But even that statement felt hollow because everyone knows the relationship between Watson and the Browns is beyond repair. The locker room reaction has been telling. Multiple Browns players, speaking anonymously to reporters, expressed frustration and disbelief that the team is locked into this situation. One defensive player told ESPN, "We've got Myles Garrett playing at a Hall of Fame level, and we can't build around him because all our money is tied up in a quarterback who can't stay on the field. It's insane." Another player told The Athletic, "At some point you have to cut your losses, but we can't even do that. We're just stuck." The national media has been absolutely brutal. Analysts are calling the Watson contract the worst decision in NFL history. Comparisons are being made to other disastrous contracts, like Albert Haynesworth with Washington or Brock Osweiler with the Texans, but everyone agrees Watson's is worse because of the sheer amount of guaranteed money and the length of the commitment. Former NFL executives are questioning how the Browns' front office and ownership allowed this to happen. They point out that the team had every opportunity to walk away from Watson in 2022 when the allegations were public knowledge. They chose to ignore the red flags, and now they're paying the price. But here's where the story takes another twist, because while the Browns are reeling from this court decision, other teams around the league are watching closely and learning from Cleveland's mistake. According to sources, multiple NFL teams are now revisiting their own contract structures to ensure they have stronger protections against situations like this. Teams are including more specific language around conduct clauses. They're building in more escape hatches. They're being more cautious about fully guaranteed contracts for players with off-field concerns. The Deshaun Watson contract and this court ruling might actually change how NFL contracts are structured going forward. Teams will be more reluctant to offer fully guaranteed deals. Players might have to accept more team-friendly language. The balance of power in contract negotiations could shift. But none of that helps the Cleveland Browns right now. They're stuck. They're broke in terms of salary cap space. They're handcuffed to a quarterback who's suspended and underperforming, and they have no good options. So, what happens next? The Browns have a few potential paths forward, and all of them are bad. Option 1, keep Watson on the roster, hope he returns from suspension in December 2026 and somehow plays well enough to justify his contract. The problem is Watson will be 31 years old by then, coming off another long layoff, and he hasn't played consistently good football since 2020. The odds of him suddenly becoming elite again are slim. Option 2, start another quarterback for the first 12 games of 2026, probably Malik Willis if the development plan works, and then awkwardly insert Watson back into the lineup when his suspension ends.
This creates a quarterback controversy, confuses the locker room, and likely results in both quarterbacks struggling. Option 3, bench Watson entirely when he returns from suspension and just accept that they're paying him $92 million to sit. This is the nuclear option. It would be humiliating for everyone involved, but it might be the only way to move forward if the Browns genuinely believe Watson hurts the team more than he helps. Option 4, try to trade Watson, though this seems almost impossible. What team would take on that contract, given his age, injury history, suspension, and recent performance? The Browns would probably have to attach draft picks just to get another team to absorb the cap hit, which would be compounding the disaster. None of these options are good, and that's the reality the Cleveland Browns are facing after this court decision. As of right now, February 8, 2026, the Browns are in crisis mode. They're trying to figure out how to build a roster with almost no cap space. They're trying to manage a locker room that's losing faith in the front office. They're trying to convince fans that there's still hope for the 2026 season, despite this disaster. But the truth is undeniable. The Deshaun Watson contract, combined with this court ruling that prevents the Browns from escaping it, might go down as the decision that ruined a decade of potential in Cleveland. They had a championship-caliber defense. They had Myles Garrett in his prime. They had a window to compete, and they slammed that window shut by gambling everything on a quarterback who couldn't deliver.
The final court decision on Deshaun Watson's contract has sealed the Cleveland Browns' fate for the next 3 years. They're locked into the worst deal in NFL history, with no escape, no cap space, and no clear path forward. What should have been a championship window has turned into a financial and organizational nightmare, and the consequences will define this franchise for years to come.